You've got to take the glamour out of it, because that is not your lifestyle. That you are supporting someone else who has that lifestyle, exactly the same way as the PA, as the chef, as the gardener, everything. You are there as part of that support mechanism, and it's not your life. So yes, whilst you're in it and you're part of it, it's not yours.
Welcome to the Sonder podcast. An epic story that continues invisibly around you, like an anthill sprawling deep underground, with elaborate passageways to thousands of other lives. I'm your host, Alexander Robertson, and this is where strangers become stories.
Welcome to the Sonder podcast. I'm your host, Alexander Robertson, and this is where strangers become stories. And I'm delighted to welcome Simon Morgan here today. Welcome, Simon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure.
Really excited for these questions. So let's have a quick overview of your career. So you're a seasoned expert with over 3 decades now of experience in the public and private security sector, starting with obviously joining the Metropolitan Police. We're going to Hendon, then into the TSG, to SO19, which is the firearms unit, or was the firearms unit.
Yeah, MO19 now, but SO19 in my time.
And then on to the very prestigious Royal Protection Group, which I believe is also called something.
It's now called RASP, Royalty and Specialist Protection.
And during this time, you were, very much in the public purview, because you're sitting on the right or the left of some pretty public figures. And you also experienced things such as the Trooping of the Colour, the 7/7 terrorist attacks, and also the Paddington Rail disaster, which I believe you also responded to. Yeah. So then, of course, a lot of our listeners are really intrigued to hear what happened between 2007 and 2013 when you became part of the Close Protection Group, or a Close Protection Officer for Senior Royals, essentially.
Yes, yeah, that was my role.
Which is something you corrected me on, because I kept saying bodyguard and you said Close Protection Officer.
Yeah, there's far more to it than being a bodyguard.
Yeah, which I'm so excited to get into, because no one knows what bodyguards do. I certainly do. So obviously you spent a lot of time with Senior Royals, and we're going to be asking some questions about that. But then also since 2013, you've also started your own business, the Trojan Consultancy.
Yes.
Where you work with extremely high-level people, some extremely high-profile public figures, and other very discreet other sorts of figures. And we'll be getting into that. You're very much known, I think, in industry, and certainly with my experience of you, for being a very effective communicator. And, some of the things I've seen you achieve in regards to clients and things like that is outrageously impressive. So you're also, as part of that, a member of the Association of Security Consultants and the Security Council, I believe.
Security Institute.
Security Institute, that's it. So that makes you a fully licensed operator, ready for any strategic situation, I believe.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. Whatever comes my way.
Oh, well, brilliant. So we're looking forward to getting into that. Welcome to the Sonder podcast.
Thank you.
And let's get going.
Okay.
Can you recount the most dangerous situation that you came across in your policing career?
I mean, without wishing to be over dramatic, then there was quite a few. Both in terms of being a uniformed response officer out in Leytonstone, and then coming onto the TSG, because by the very definition of being on the territorial support group, you're dealing with some of the possibly most nastiest, most deadliest people that London has to offer. So you're constantly putting yourself in harm's way. Then you move into SO19 and the firearms unit, whereby you've just given some of the most nastiest and deadliest people a firearm as well to go with it. So I think, those are most probably some of the times whereby you're tested, and certainly you're put into a scenario whereby you are that last line of defense. You're sent there to kind of deal with it, because certainly in those specialist roles, ordinary response officers have deemed that they've gone as far as they can. So, there was an incident on a hostage rescue that we had to do out in East London, whereby I had acid thrown all over myself. And wow. First time I really kind of knew about it, when I said to one of my colleagues, my back's really kind of itching, can you have a look at it? And actually the acid had burnt all the way through my kind of uniform. So if you imagine that kind of comic scene whereby, I had a complete hole in my back whereby I'm smouldering away. Subsequently, then completely had my uniform cut off me. The fire brigade who were there in support of us then doused me with a hose. Then the London Ambulance Service, who were also there, threw a load of gel over me, and then I was whisked off to the Royal London Hospital. With various burns on my back, some sensory damage around my nose and mouth, which kind of still lasts kind of to this day. But so that was one of the scenarios whereby it's kind of like, well, hey, it's just me.
Part of your job,
pretty much, and that's the way you saw it. So when you kind of recount a lot of these dangerous situations, then actually they're just part and parcel of your job. Standing as number one on a firearms entry team, knowing that you're going to get someone that's armed with a firearm or committed a crime with a firearm and due to arrest, that is pretty high octane, dangerous type stuff, and you've really got to reconcile that in your brain, otherwise you wouldn't take those steps forward, and even going into the royalty protection scenario, every time you stepped out with a senior member of the royal family, you effectively, or they, do to a certain extent, have a target on their back. Yeah. And you've very much got to work within those spaces and identify what you're expecting to see and what you're not expecting to see, and therefore is that a risk to you or is it not? So, policing as a whole is pretty dangerous.
It sounds very dangerous. I mean, the word that jumps to mind is chilling. The realization that someone's using offensive weapons, acid, not even one I'd thought about.
That particular guy had gone into Bow County Court. He wanted a warrant to arrest the King and Queen.
Oh, wow.
Subsequently, a mental health assessment took place. He took those people hostage, and we had to go and get them back out again. But he'd boiled up some pans of I think it's one-shot drain cleaner or something like that, which was is 95% acid. And he threw it at us when we went through the door. So and at that time our uniform probably wasn't up to an acid attack, as we found out. Guys' gloves started to melt, bootlaces started to fall off. And like I said, I'd had a roll around, had a wrestle with this guy on the floor to overpower him until colleagues came and supported me. And like I said, I just had this itching feeling in my back, and like
something that's with you now to this day.
Yeah, pretty much. You're kind of scarred with that, and both physically with regards to burns on my back, but I have a very poor sense of smell and taste, because of that, because some of the vapor actually went underneath my visor.
Really?
So,
and that's all in the course of your regular duties?
That's just another day. I think that happened on a Friday. I had the weekend off because my team was meant to be on. But you're back in work on the Monday.
Wow.
That's just the way it is, because you're working on kind of quite small teams. You become very much, you can't let anybody down.
No.
So you patch yourself up and go back into work. That's the nature of policing as it was then.
It's extraordinary. And what would you say is one of the biggest challenges that is recurrent in the policing side of your career and security, and how have you overcome that?
From a policing perspective, you're trained to do everything that you do.
Yeah.
And you practice it, you go through it, you reconcile yourself with it physically and mentally, and you're constantly creating those frame of references so you can do the work. I must probably say the biggest challenge for me was going out into the private sector, because I'd always been very much institutionalized, whereby everything is done for you. You get paid on a certain date. You have your holidays at a certain time, and all of a sudden you go out into the private sector, set up this business. I most probably didn't know what I was doing. That was most probably and it still is quite a challenge, kind of to me. I can remember in the very early days, I used to run a ledger for the VAT, and you do that and you put everything in order, and you have all the receipts there, and you have this ledger, and it looked really nice and great. And the first time the accountants ask for it, you send it all to them, and it's great. And then they say, well, can I have the next quarter? Well, what do you mean the next quarter? Well, that comes every quarter. And you're like, really? As opposed to then the next time, it was like, well, there's a load of receipts and just kind of deal with it.
Yeah.
So, so I find working in the private sector a challenge, but nonetheless a rewarding challenge, because I'm very much now in charge of my own destiny.
Yeah. I mean, interesting to transition from such a sort of big family or big structure into that private element. I mean, there's no backup, I imagine.
No, you're very much on your own, both in terms of that operational piece and starting the business. When you're in the police, you turn around and your friends and colleagues are there to support you at all times, whether you're on a TSG carrier or whether you're in an armed response vehicle. You're always surrounded by your friends. When you step out in the private sector as a new business person, you turn around and there's nobody there.
That's it.
You're on your own, and and obviously there are differences, nuances between a protection officer working as a police protection officer for a senior member of the royal family or a government minister, and how you operate in the private sector within ultimately what is a similar role, but with far different discrepancies with it.
So it's so interesting. I mean, now you're also dealing with a lot of high-profile people, who've in film and things like that, and athletes, and just fascinating crowd of people. And I'm looking forward to getting further into that later on in the conversation. But what is one of the most misunderstood things about your profession? Because externally people think bodyguard, close protection, very glamorous, the dark suits and stuff like that.
I mean, you've got to take the glamour out of it, because that is not your lifestyle. That you are supporting someone else who has that lifestyle, exactly the same way as the PA, as the chef, as the gardener, everything. You are there as part of that support mechanism, and it's not your life. So yes, whilst you're in it and you're part of it, it's not yours. So you have to get your head around that in the first place. Yes, you get to go into some fantastic environments, you get to meet some fantastic people. But then after that, you have to step away from it and go back to your life. And if you can't make that distinction between the two, then you'll have a problem. But I think, as I always say, the Hollywood version of a bodyguard, or the stereotypical kind of bodyguard, is not actually where it's at. Being a protection officer, it's a thinking person's game. If you can't think, you're going to struggle. And you have to be able to walk and talk at the same time. So yes, it's great being of a certain physical stature and having a skill set that goes, with an M&A fighter. However, if you can't think, and you can't think for yourself and you can't think for others, then you're going to struggle.
Yeah, I think we had a discussion a while back, which I found so interesting, because we both worked in that world where, a lot of people are focusing not necessarily on the professionalism side, but the appearance side. And I think, we discussed vanity bodyguards, essentially.
Yeah, style over substance, as they say, and certainly, when we look at our team makeup, you have to have the ability to be able to do it. You have to have the attitude to do it. And also you have to have the appearance. Now, when I say that appearance, not wishing to contradict what I just said, but it's the appearance of that professionalism, that ability to do, because at the end of the day, somebody is placing their trust in you, that when you strip everything back about what my role is about, you're there to keep them alive. So they have to trust that you can do that. So if you don't fit that appearance, in so much as you're kind of overweight, you're huffing and puffing walking upstairs and things like that, the client is not going to have an honest held belief that you're going to be able to do your job, because they're saying, well, you're struggling actually to look after yourself. How can you look after somebody else?
Yeah. No, it's so interesting. We spoke also together about suits, and one of the other podcast guests that we have is a tailor, and the importance of dressing is touched on a lot there. And obviously we're both here today wearing suits and ties.
Yes, absolutely. We discussed that beforehand to make sure that we had the right appearance.
Exactly. And that appearance, I imagine, is an important tool in what you do.
Very much so. You have to dress to your environment. You have to also dress so that you blend in with your principal as well. So you don't stand out. Because again, my big thing is always about unsettling the environment. If you unsettle the environment, you cause yourself problems. So you've got to be able to blend in. And certainly, when I was at Royalty, it wasn't unusual to have a Mr. Ben day as we used to call it, in so much as you would start the day maybe in a lounge suit, then you'd maybe go into a morning suit for an investiture, then you'd be back in a lounge suit for a lunch, then you may have to do a few other bits and pieces, and you finish at a black tie dinner that evening. Constantly.
A lot of outfit changes.
A lot of outfit changes, yes, constantly changing.
It's not something you necessarily associate with bodyguards, but
it's not. But you've got to be able to. You want to be as close to your principal as possible. You want to be able to blend in as much as possible and not stand out, and also to a certain extent reduce your profile.
Such an important tool.
Change it up a mix. They often will say, you need to be able to dress up to dress down. And yes, there is that rationale around it. But if you can get that right from the outset, then yes, you should be able to be close. You should be able to do your job. You should be able to kind of blend in. And those are some of the key aspects of operating at the level that we operate at.
Yeah. I mean, I can't wait to ask this next question, because at Sonder, it's all about, taking really exciting people and actually understanding you, not just the surface level success of here's Simon, he's an incredibly well-known professional, But, where are you from, Simon?
So I'm originally from Swansea in South Wales, born and bred down there, spent most of my life down there until I made the break to university. Went to university in Cheltenham to do a sports science degree because it was something that very much interests me, and they had a very good rugby team, so I went there.
Very good fun.
Yeah, very much so. And it was a good 3 years. I wouldn't say I totally enveloped myself in student life. I was a little bit later. I didn't go to university until I was 20. So, I wasn't a mature student by any means, but I'd already worked and done some other things, and then went to university. And
your childhood, is there any sort of values or experiences that shaped who you are today, either culturally or familially?
Mum and dad, ultimately, they put me on the straight and narrow, taught me right and wrong, gave me all the values, and you still adhere to that today. You make sure, when you go and see your parents, you're still polite, respectful, and all these things. So yes, that family unit. I have a younger brother who's 6 years younger than me. So, we were, as far as I was concerned, I had a very normal childhood.
Yeah.
And that was normal to me. Family holidays, time with grandparents, aunts and uncles. And, pretty much, and that's what you value, and I think even more now, the fact that my parents are both nearly 80, you value that even more. You want to spend as much time with them as you can, and make sure they can see what you're doing, because ultimately they started you on that journey. I mean, my parents moved home so I could go to a different school. So I have a lot to thank them for.
Yeah. Wow, fantastic! And obviously that's been instilled into now your life with your lovely family as well. So.
Yeah, it is. I mean, being a parent is most probably the most challenging thing I've ever done. I have 3 children. I have a daughter of 18 and 2 sons, one of 15 and one of 12. And my wife and I were talking about it last night, actually, to say that everything we ever did in policing, they sent you on a course to do it, so you could do it to the best of your ability. Parenting, they don't really do that. They just say, well, there's your children and off you go, and you've got to hope for the best. And you draw a lot of your influence from your own parents and your own experiences. But I think certainly being a dad is the most challenging thing I've ever done.
I love that. As someone whose job was literally to jump in front of bullets potentially.
That's easy. That's
easy bit.
Being a dad to an 18-year-old daughter, that's challenging. I kind of pretty much move that over to my wife. She has the experience around that, and similarly dealing with a 15 and a 12-year-old son as well, and looking at everything that they're doing. And I think making sure that your viewpoint and the things that you have seen doesn't cloud their vision too much about what the world is like. You want them to understand that the world has its dark places, but not to the point whereby they don't get to enjoy themselves. So that's most probably one of the challenges that we're facing at the moment with a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old.
Yeah, you want to protect them, but you don't want to jade
them. And you don't want to kind of mollycoddle them either. They've got to sometimes make their own decisions and understand whether that decision was right or wrong. But similarly, put them exactly the same as what my parents did, put you into situations whereby you gain your own experience and you make your own decisions. It's no good kind of mum and dad constantly making all the decisions for you, otherwise they'll never leave home. No. And that's not where I want to be.
No. So talking of that, if we were to go back to young Simon in your childhood, did you envision this path, being a police officer and then a security consultant?
Not to the finite of where we are now. I think growing up, I wanted to be an ice cream man.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to do. I thought that was the best job ever. You get to kind of drive around, park on the seafront.
Eat the ice cream.
Eat the ice cream. What more is there kind of in life? Yeah. That's what I wanted to do when I was younger. And then you go through that bit of not really knowing. You then have to understand that at some point you're going to have to go to work. And, what does that work look like for you? My mum was a nurse, worked in the big hospital in Swansea in the theatre department. And my dad ran a market store, a pet shop inside Swansea's indoor market. So I kind of grew up within those two environments. But my dad said, this isn't the business for you. And I think that's more my personality than anything else. I could do it. It just wasn't the business for you. I don't think we ever had a conversation with my mum about the medical profession, but my brother's a doctor, so I suppose he's kind of ticked off that box in my mum's eyes. So, but then you start to think, well, what am I going to do? And what am I good at? Being a young rugby player in Wales, you're naturally only ever going to play for Wales, and that's all that kind of matters. And then certainly you realise that actually there was no money in it at the time. It wasn't professional, and that's most probably not a good career choice. If you want to earn money around that, and then you just start looking. Well, do I like this and do I like that? Could I envision myself in an office? Most probably not. Do I want to work away from home? Most probably not. You look at different things, and I knew a lot of policemen, and I migrated towards them, whether they were at the rugby club or I was a fitness instructor for the YMCA when I first left school. There was a lot of police officers in there. You find yourself talking to them and listening ultimately to their tales of daring and good. And you think, okay, that
sounds cool.
I kind of like this. And of course, policing, you see it all the time. Yeah. Whether that's an officer walking up and down the street, whether that's a patrol car on blues and twos. You think, I think I could. It when I looked into it, it had everything that I wanted. It had the challenge, had the excitement, had the camaraderie, it had the teamwork, and I thought, this is what I could do.
Because you were originally going to join Gloucestershire Police.
I was.
There's a twist of fate here that I love. So
it is ultimately, because otherwise we wouldn't be here now. And so I was in Cheltenham doing a sports science degree, and I was very much a home bird. Most weekends I was back in Swansea, or my friends were back in Swansea. And I thought, I've got to make the break. And at the time, South Wales Police, they weren't recruiting, but Gloucestershire were. So I thought, it's kind of halfway house. I can most probably still get back to Wales and everything will be fine. Yeah. So I applied to join Gloucester Constabulary as it was then. And got accepted. Great, didn't really need to think about anything else, and I was going to go in on the accelerated promotion, the graduate scheme, because everybody advised me that's what you need to do. Upon reflection, I'm glad I didn't go on the graduate scheme, and we'll maybe touch on that later on. But so I got accepted for Gloucestershire. Great. I'd thought about the Met, and my dad was a firm believer that I should go to the Met. He was. That's where the opportunities are. Again, he'd known people who'd gone there and potentially gone back to South Wales. And it was kind of there in the background, okay, but, I'm looking at this more as a personal thing rather than a career thing. But my dad was, no, I think you should go to the Met. Met.
So he pushed you towards that?
Well, he did. Went. So got accepted for Gloucestershire. Yeah. Great. In my final year of university, I was always very keen that I would leave university and go straight to work. Didn't want to be too much of a drain kind of on my parents. That was going to be my brother's job because he was doing a medical degree. So I feel we had to have a swap around. Yeah. And I then got notification saying, I'm really sorry, we're freezing recruiting. We're not recruiting. Because at that time, Gloucestershire Constabulary were busily going around the Gloucestershire countryside, digging it up, looking for the victims of Fred and Rosemary West.
Yeah. Which put a huge hole in their budget.
Massively. And in those days, the old days, when police forces ran out of money, they ran out of money. That was it. First thing to go was recruitment, and then you'd work your way all the way down, until you couldn't actually put police cars on the road anymore, or you almost had elements of an engine out of that one and car doors off that one just to keep them running. And you could only go out, I know South Wales used to do it, you could only go out and do something like 10 or 12 miles a shift. Wow. Once you'd got to that number, you had to come back in and then become responsive, and as opposed to proactive. So, and it was like, right, well, what do I do now? And they said, well, we've sent your form to the Met for accelerated promotion. Yeah. And I was like, okay, great, okay. And then I thought, well, I need a bit of a safety net here, because the clock was ticking. And so I applied to the Met as a normal entrant using my Cheltenham address, and I applied to South Wales using my mum's address, because at the time you couldn't actually apply, you had to apply for one force at a time. And literally all 3 letters came back at the same time. Accelerated promotion from the Met said, sorry, you've missed this year. Go reapply another time. The letter from the Met came back, having gone through the process, and said, we've accepted you. And so too did the letter for South Wales. We've accepted you. And then I had to make a big decision as to where I was going to go, which, my dad said, if you want a policing career, you've got to go to the Met.
Well, the oldest organised police force in the world, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But plus it's, obviously it's the biggest in the United Kingdom. Yeah. And he said, the opportunities are there. And I think I'd also started to envisage that I would like to be a protection officer at that point. I'd started to map out my career and where it would go, albeit from a unknown point, because, you see elements of policing, you don't know all of them. And, I just had it in my mind that this is where, these are the stepping stones I'd like to take. And yeah, I made the decision to head off. It was a big decision. It was, because I'd always been that kind of home bird, and I didn't envisage myself ever living, outside of South Wales. To actually live in Cheltenham, which is only, just short of 90 minutes away from Swansea, that was going to be a stretch, let alone going all the way up the M4 to London. Yeah,
I love that, because, tough protection officer, that's the image, and that's certainly the professional that you are, but also such a wholesome individual. You've had a lovely childhood, lovely family. I don't know, people don't really seem to think about that when they think about...
No, police officers are human. We are, we are human, and no matter what paths you take within policing, you still have to be a human being. You still have to function as one. But yeah, it was a big decision. 9th of September 1995. Wow. Swansea coach station. Mum and Dad put us on the coach. You're waving goodbye. My dad leaned over, said something to my mum. My mum burst into tears. And I drove off, or rather the bus drove me off. And many years later, I said to my dad, what did you... when we were at the coach station that day, what did you say to Mum? And he said, she was chatting away, and I just said, well, he'll never be back. And she burst into tears. I was like, oh, right, okay. So really pouring oil on somewhat troubled waters at that point. And but the reality is I never went back. I think if you're going to make the decision to move away from home, join an organisation like the Met, you've got to give it 100%. You can't keep on looking back and thinking, well, if it doesn't quite work out, I can always nip back down the M4 and maybe join South Wales. Or if I get a bit lonely, I can go back and join South Wales. My attitude was, I'm here. I'm here now, and let's see where this journey is going to take me. And ultimately it started on the 9th of September 1995 when I came to London and went to Hendon along with my intake of another 100-odd people ready to start that journey.
Wonderful parents, obviously, and I'm sure they're extremely proud of you.
I'd like to think so. I'd like to think so. Both me and my brother, we've done what we wanted to. My brother lives out in Australia with his family.
Interesting.
And has achieved, a tremendous amount within his profession. So, I'd like to think we have. They are proud of us. I think the only thing, as my mum says, I wish you both lived a bit nearer.
Closer.
Obviously I'm a bit nearer and my brother is not nearer at all. But then my mum and dad spend pretty much half the year out in Australia with my brother as well.
Oh, well,
so,
nice.
it's a kind of a good balance. It's a nice problem to have.
Absolutely. Well, I know our listeners are really desperate to hear the answer to this in this next series of questions. What is royalty protection?
So royalty protection is the physical protection of senior members of the royal family. In my time, it was called SO14 brackets 2, which is Specialist Operations Department 14, and brackets 2, which was the protection officers, because royalty at that point had 3 strands.
Right.
Brackets 1 was the uniformed officers who you see very visible outside all the royal palaces. Their responsibility is to protect that palace and those people in it as well. They're the visible physical deterrent around that. They monitor all the alarms, they control the movements in and out. That's their core responsibility. Then you had the protection officers, brackets 2, and our role was the protection of senior members of the royal family outside of that protected environment that brackets 1 were providing.
Yeah.
So
when you're going from bracket 1
to bracket, when you left bracket 1, you kind of came into bracket 2, and that's what we did, and we looked after their personal protection. And in layman's terms, you are the bodyguards. We refer to ourselves as protection officers because I think there's more to it than that archetypal bodyguard image.
Yeah, so close protection officers.
Yes, close protection officers, and you have all those competent skills to go with it. And then brackets 3. Brackets 3 was the special escort group, whose responsibility is the mobile protection of those senior members of the royal family and indeed government ministers, because it's a shared resource. So those are the officers that you see out on the bikes doing the escorting duty. And it's not just dignitaries that they'll escort. They'll also escort Category A prisoners to court. Destruction of dangerous loads. They'll even move the crown jewels as well. So those are the 3 parts. So actually on a day-to-day basis, all those 3 parts in most cases are working in unison with each other. You have the uniformed officers who provide you that contained, controlled, sterile environment. You take that member of the royal family out, then put them into our environment, supported by the special escort group who will allow us to move around. And then you take them back to that controlled environment because the uniformed officers have maintained the integrity of that site to take them back.
And I've seen you work and I've seen the special escort group work. It's so impressive. What training are you given to make sure that you're able to do that, and what equipment are you given, and how does that help you do the job?
So lots of the skills that you get in policing are actually built up. You have layered training. So if you go back to my time and my career, I chose to go to the Territorial Support Group at Paddington Green because at the time they were the only TSG that carried firearms, because Paddington Green was a maximum security police station to hold, back then, IRA prisoners. It felt that the TSG had an operational role that when IRA prisoners were in, you had to provide armed security to the police station. So I wanted to kind of go and do that because I knew the next stage for me then was to go to SO19. So going to SO19, they take your skill level and they enhance it and they give you different skills. They develop some of the skills that you had originally, and they give you different weaponry to use and so on and so forth. And then when I went to royalty, they enhance and develop those skills again and give you extra skills. But the process of going into royalty is you apply. So it comes out as we are looking to recruit. You do a paper application form, which various competency frameworks, decision making under pressure, teamwork, so on and so forth. Then you will go for an interview. Then you will go for what they call an assessment, a 2-day assessment. You're not being assessed on being a protection officer. You're assessed on whether you've got the attributes to be a protection officer.
Right.
And they basically push you, they stress test you. That's the reality. They will stress test you. And I always look at it, a scenario of two jugglers. Two jugglers are quite capable of juggling 4 balls, but you both get given a 5th ball. And one juggler who was really good now drops that 5th ball and can't recover, can't bring it back. Even though the other juggler also drops that 5th ball, but carries on with the other 4 balls and thinks that's fine, then eventually gets the 5th ball back. That's what they're looking at from a royalty protection perspective. That's the kind of person that they want. When you get to that stress-tested point, do you fail and completely capitulate? Or do you manage to manage the situation that you're in and then come back and still go forward? That's what they're looking for.
I imagine that so many of these things that you see are so fluid, you've got to react so quickly.
Absolutely. Your speed of thought is really, really key. So, once you've done your assessment, there are various courses that you then have to do. For me, I was already a firearms officer. I was already a Class 1 advanced driver as well. So I had to do my actual bodyguard course, which there's elements of the physical side of it, the crash and bash, and then there's elements of the actual how you're going to do the job. Not quite the etiquette piece, but certainly your formations, how you will do recce's, how you conduct yourself, and so on and so forth. So then once you get to that point, you get a date to start, and that's it. But all that training is layered. It's not just a case of pulling someone out of a policing role and put them in another one. You have that layer of training. And I was very fortunate. I mapped things out in my mind as to where I wanted to go and where on each level would I be tested to allow me to get to that royalty protection piece, so that you knew when you get there, you are the best person that you can be. But that's policing as a whole. You have all those courses. Even if you look at driving courses, you're a basic driver whereby you can't really do much other than just drive from call to take a report. And then you go to becoming a response driver. Then you become an advanced driver. Then you become an anti-hijack driver. And all that kind of gets built up.
So there's so much qualification.
There's so much qualifications. Yeah. When you strip it back, to be a police protection officer, you've most probably done somewhere in the region of about 6 months worth of courses.
Wow.
Now, obviously, that's not continuous, and a lot of those are just development from the next stage. Like I said, being a response driver to then being an advanced driver, they're just developing that 2-week course now into a 4-week course. Yeah. And each time they push you harder. They push you harder again, and when you talk about advanced driving, when you're driving at high speeds, you've really got to get your thought process right, because what is happening on the front of your bonnet at high speeds is now a lot quicker than the lower speed. So it gives you that, how you assimilate information, which again is another key attribute of being a protection officer, which we touched on earlier on. You've got to be able to walk and talk at the same time. If you can't do that, then you're going to have problems.
It's not the role for you.
It's not the role for you, because you've got to be thinking a step ahead. You've also got to rationalise it. If I do this now, what will be the end result? If I don't do this, what will be the end result? But also, you can't then have the paralysis of thought. You can't be having a debate with yourself whilst all this is happening. You've got to count it in, count it out. This is a problem. This isn't a problem, and kind of keep on going. So there's a lot more to it. Like I said, the Hollywood perception. What people see maybe out on red carpet events and things like that, that's not where we're at. That's not what's gone into you. It's got to be, you've got to be able to think. It is a thinking person's game. And
then the accumulation, all of that, of course, in 2007 and until 2013, you were protecting senior royals of the British royal family, which is one of the most closely watched, and people are so fascinated with that family. And obviously you're living their day-to-day life. And I wanted to ask you, what was the most interesting moments for you personally and professionally?
You understand the pressure that you're under. That's most probably the key thing. You've got to understand the pressure that you're under being a protection officer. And I think even more so now in a 24-hour global media situation that we have. Because whatever happens now is out there and it's not being pulled back. In the old days, whatever happened today Might make the Evening Standard at this time, might not. If not, it's tomorrow morning's paper. Maybe make the 9 o'clock news. And then what's tomorrow morning's paper is tomorrow evening's kind of chip wrapper. So, from that aspect. But now, what happens now is out there globally. And therefore, you've got to understand the pressure that you operate under around that. So, so there's a tremendous amount of weight of responsibility. And weight of responsibility across the board. You're representing yourself. You're representing royalty protection, or RASP as it's called now, Royalty and Specialist Protection. You're representing the Metropolitan Police Service. You're representing British policing as a whole. Lots of people come to the UK to find out how British policing works, not just in terms of protection, firearms schemes, detectives, mounted, even the Special Escort Group. Lots of people come to the UK to find out how they do it. So you're looking at that, brand as well to a certain extent. And then you're representing, obviously in my time, Her Majesty's Government, Her Majesty's Commonwealth, which is now obviously His Majesty's Government and His Majesty's Commonwealth. And every British business that trades under a British flag, because we stand there and say, we do things very well. This is the British model of protection, which differs slightly to any other model around the world. And this is the way we do it, and this is the way it works, and it's very successful. Yeah. So you feel all those pressures, and then you step out with a senior member of the royal family, and you fully understand those pressures, because you are now putting a senior member of that family in the public domain. And as much as you've put everything in place, you're still dealing with people. And, yes, you're working with other stakeholders, and you're working with other members of law enforcement, and you're hoping that everything that's been put in place, they will do their job. But as a protection officer, standing on the shoulder of a senior member of the royal family, it is down to you. You are the last line of defence, without being melodramatic, but that's the reality. And you've got to get it right every time. Bad guy only has to get it right once. And that's across the board, not just in protection.
And with that, because you're always dealing with these then it was the senior royals, and now I know you deal with a lot of high-profile celebrities. Do you have techniques that you use to build rapport, psychological approach to how that relationship works? Because imagine to be effective, you have to have a relationship with the protectee.
Oh, totally. If you do not have that relationship, then it's a very difficult day in work. And that relationship is probably quite multifaceted. Trust is really important. Does that individual trust you to do your job when you need to do it?
And listen to you, I imagine.
Well, again, that's another key part. A client has to value, or a principal has to value what we say. If they don't value what we say, and they're going to do the total opposite, then why are we actually there? Because you're never going to get traction. It's just not going to work. So you have to build up that rapport. You have to ultimately be a communicator. If you struggle to communicate, again, very difficult day in the office, because a lot of my work is built around communication. Yes, you have this extremely hard skill set of driving, firearms, medical, unarmed combat. But most of the time, you're going to be talking to someone because you want somebody to do something for you. You're in a scenario when you go somewhere, you're normally trying to negotiate, you're normally trying to compromise. Where are we going to stop? Where are we going to park? And where are we going to go? And all these things. So communication is what you're using 99% of the time. All that hard skill set is very much there for when needed. And what you'll do, you'll talk to people. But if you don't have a rapport with your client, if you find that, you either talk too much and don't know when to be quiet, you have inappropriate conversations, or indeed you just sit there and don't say anything, then you're not going to build up that rapport, because you'll be judged as kind of, one thing or the other. So you've got to know when to speak, you've got to know what to say, and you've also got to know when to be quiet, and when to interject. If you're constantly, like the meerkat, for argument's sake, constantly looking around, you'll put your principal on edge, because they think, well, what is he seeing that I'm not? And certainly when you look at senior members of the royal family, when you arrive on day one, they already have a lifetime of experience of what protection looks like. Yeah. You've arrived fresh off your course, and therefore you know a lot, but they know far more than you. They know how you should be behaving, as well as everything that you know that you should be doing. So you've got to really work between the two of you. And certainly now in the private sector, our depth of experience, that's what clients come to us for.
And with the senior royals, obviously you're behind a curtain that so many people want to look behind. Was there any, moment that you felt, people wouldn't have expected of them, or a quirky, nice moment that you had that you'd like to share today?
In protection, you get to see people at their best and their worst. That's most probably the part of it. But I think you also get to see people away from the public gaze. And very similar to police officers I touched on earlier on, we are human beings. So too are members of the royal family. And, yes, they are normal and they do normal things and they have normal conversations with you. And sometimes it's as normal as talking about the weather. Sometimes it's as normal as just asking you, how's your family? And vice versa. Because again, it comes back to building up that rapport.
Very human.
Very human. So, but you've also got to be very respectful as well. Again, you can't overstep that line because of the nature of the person that you're conversing with. So you've always got to be extremely respectful. But, sometimes those members of the royal family and sometimes principals, kind of now that we work within the private sector, just want a human approach. Because being a protection officer, being a protection officer to the Queen and being part of that team, you're in quite a unique position. So you're not a member of the royal household, and you're not a member of the public. You're actually a Metropolitan Police officer, because here in the UK, protection of the royal family is a policing responsibility. It varies throughout the world. It belongs to some military entities, or indeed, a dedicated unit like the Secret Service in the US. But here in the UK, it belongs to policing, and it belongs to the Metropolitan Police Service in particular. They are the only UK force that have dedicated protection departments. It's part of your career choice, which we've already touched on. So, you are a police officer employed by the Metropolitan Police Service. And that degree of separation is quite important, both in terms of that command structure, but also your ability to see things differently and sometimes give that human element around it, rather than, being an employee maybe and feeling that you have to say a certain thing, or indeed being a member of the public and not knowing quite what to say. The amount of people that, certainly in my time, the Prince of Wales, the now King, would go and speak to people because he's a communicator. He wants to come and speak to you. And people would just freeze. Yeah. And then you'd walk away and you'd hear them say, I just didn't know what to say to him. Yeah. And he's very good at things like that. He will engage you in conversation. He'll get a conversation out of someone who's completely panicked, because that's what he's what he's
a very charming chap as well.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. He's very much a people person. Very different to how the Queen was. The Queen, certainly wouldn't be doing selfies and things like that. Which is a modern phenomenon, which thankfully I didn't have to deal with in my time. But yeah, you're very mindful of who you're working with, and I think you do see different aspects of people, and I think that's really important.
And that concludes our first part of our interview with Simon Morgan, ex-Royalty Protection Officer. So please stay tuned for part 2 coming in the next few weeks.